So in the late 1800s, Darwin published what is now embraced by science as the probable way in which we evolved. The idea that the species on the planet became more and more strong and became the different variations that we see today in order to compete and adapt. What some call the survival of the fittest. So in many ways, competition has played an integral role in our physical evolution, and even in many ways in our drive to innovate, in having all of the wonderful comforts that we experience today. Yet for the human species, the function of competition is rapidly approaching a destructive level, at least in my opinion. The very act of competing means that there are winners and there are losers. It sets us into an us versus them mentality. It enforces the belief that we're separate. And remember, we learned last week that separation is one of those winds that blows up those storms of conflict in our world. And competition is the third wind that we're exploring today in this series that we are completing today, that we've been moving through and completing today based on the book, The Eye of the Storm. Today, the polarizing effects of unrestrained competition can be seen in every aspect of our lives. We certainly see it in our politics, we see it in our businesses, we see it in the way that we interact with Mother Earth, in our relationships, in our willingness to go to war as often as we do, not only in this country, but certainly in populations all over the world. Our competitive drive says that we must win at all costs. And then we have to keep on winning. It's not enough to just win once. If we won once, then we're starting to strategize about how we're going to win whatever the next challenge that arises. And this model of living, this belief, if we have it unrestrained within us, often is what drives us to do unethical and have unloving behaviors to those that we see are on the opposite side. We as human beings are on the top of the evolutionary chain, and we have a special role to play in our world because we are conscious, and we have the ability to direct our consciousness. We have the ability to shift and change and adapt in new ways. And yet we seem to have lost sight of what all of the lower level species seem to know innately, that we are all connected in this great circle of life. You know, I recently watched the new Lion King. It's not really new now, but it was new on Disney for me to watch. And it reminded me of how much that we still have to learn from our animal kingdom. I wanted to play you just a little clip this morning. So as conscious co-creators with God, we indeed rule everything the light touches. And yet it only works when we respect, when we honor, when we remember that we are all connected. We are on the cusp, at least that's how it feels to me, of making the next leap in our conscious evolution, where we no longer value or believe our only choices are either or, but we move to that place where we begin to see it's both and, where collaboration and cooperation become our next evolutionary driver. Because the challenge with competition is that we have attached it to our own self-worth. If we lose, we often feel less than. If we win, at least for a little while, we feel more worthy. We feel a little better about ourselves. And so in order to feel better, more often, we sort of become hyper-focused on wanting to do whatever's necessary to win. Many have called this like keeping up with the Joneses. Have you had that? You know, it's like we want to always be that place where people are telling us how wonderful we are. And this is not something we see reflected in the animal kingdom. I want you to think about this, because this is really the reflection of where we are being called to be. You don't see, even though the lion is the king of his particular area, killing more than one antelope or more than enough to feed those around them in that moment just because they can. And that is part of what we are being called. We may have the power to do it, but we don't do it just because we can. We have to begin to make choices to say this is what's most necessary, and it's the least amount that I have to take in order to be able to give the world what it needs. So how do we make this shift? How do we shift out of this overdrive of competition? And I'm curious, so I'm just going to ask you guys what your thoughts are. How do we make this shift to where we can be more in collaboration rather than in competition? Anybody? And if you want to type in a comment, for those of you who are watching remotely, they're all quiet today. There's no wrong answers. We listen. What else? We reach out to others. Self-awareness is a good one. Say again? Don't be afraid. I've got to stop and listen here too. Somebody else? Get good information. That's always helpful to have good information. Give people the space to grow into their full potential. If I paraphrase a little bit for you there, Tom. Anybody else? Give more. Become alert, awake, and aware to the truth in me. I think they're all wonderful answers, and they're all critical in this awareness that we have to step into in order to be able to make that shift. Gary Simmons writes in his book, so I'm going to give you his antidote to this wind of competition, that in order to shift from this, we have to move our lives to where we live on purpose. And I think every one of those things that we just heard about is really reflective of how it looks when we're living on purpose. Purpose is that peaceful center in the eye of the storm. It is what allows us to live in this world of competing values and needs and still be a peaceful present. You know, Reverend Pat Moore is going to be here next Sunday, and synchronistically enough, she is going to be speaking on knowing your life's purpose. So I hope you'll come and explore with her and get to know a little bit more about your own life's purpose. But we all have a common purpose as human beings. We may have our individual ways of how we express that purpose into the world, but we all have one spiritual purpose. All humanity has this purpose, and I think we can even go bigger and macro. All of life has this purpose. And it is to be, as Jesus said, the way, the truth, and the life of God. Now, you may think that in order to be whole, to be happy, have a positive self-image about yourself, that you need to change something about yourself, whether it's to recover from an illness or to release an addiction or get over a failed relationship or lose the 30 pounds. That's probably one that I have, finished therapy, get that promotion, whatever it is. But none of this has anything to do with your wholeness, with your worth, or with your purpose. Doesn't matter. You could have failed at all of those things and fulfilled the one thing that you came to this earth to do. So in any arena where there's conflict in your life, I want you to begin to ask yourself this question. Am I being the way of God, or am I being in the way of God? When you're struggling with something, ask yourself, am I being the way of God in this moment? Because that's our purpose, is to be the way of God. And here's a hint. If you're judging, blaming, fearful, dishonest, unwilling, unforgiving, doubting, unkind, or just plain negative, you're in the way. It's time to let yourself get out of the way, that human part of you get out of the way. Another question you can ask yourself is, what is the truth of this situation? Not what's necessarily happening, not what they said, what she said, what is unfolding in this moment, but what is the truth about this situation? Because no matter what the situation looks like, and no matter how terrible it may seem, or how awful it might be for those involved, there is a truth in the midst of it. You are being the truth of God, that second part of your purpose, when you are a witness to the activity or to the presence of God in that situation. If you can just begin, even in the smallest measure, to acknowledge that God is right in the midst of this situation, it becomes a way to shift the conflict. You're being the truth of God when you can see beyond the sights and the sounds and the emotions of the moment and see the situation as fluid, as organic, and as responsive to the power of prayer and the power of love. To know that whatever is expressing in this moment is just a moment. And as you continue to hold and affirm the truth, the next moment can be totally different. And the last instruction is to be the life of God. And what does it look like to be the life of God? I wanted to share with you this writing. It's from about 500 BCE from the Tao. And it says this: men are born soft and supple, women are too. Dead, they are stiff and hard. Plants are born tender and pliant. Dead, they are brittle and dry. Thus, whoever is stiff and inflexible is a disciple of death, and whoever is soft and yielding is a disciple of life. So you know that you are being the life of God when you are open, when you're willing, when you're flexible, when you're willing to not be attached to whatever the outcome might be, but simply be the presence in the midst of it. The way we begin to free ourselves from this drive to compete, this drive to be right, this drive to have things look and feel a certain way, in order to really be able to be present from our whole and complete selves, is to remember our purpose. And your real purpose is not about getting your way. It is about being the way and the truth and the life. And the final wind that stirs up those storms of conflict in our life is defensiveness. And defensiveness, like competition, was developed in our human evolution as a survival instinct. I mean, there is actually a physiological response when we move into being defensive. We'll know it. Our bodies become more rigid, our muscles tighten, our internal systems queue up, the chemicals start flowing as we prepare to either fight or flee. By its very definition, defensiveness implies the presence of an adversary. And it's usually triggered when one of the other winds are also blowing around us, especially that wind of separation, when we feel like it's me and it's them, and feel a threat, defensiveness rises up. It can also show up when we misperceive a situation. Remember, we talked about that last week. When we see it from a clouded view, when we make it to mean something that it may not necessarily be meaning, that energy of defensiveness can rise up. We looked last week that the antidote for separation is communion, is that ability to really tap into and connect with the God of life. And to misperception is to see it right, to see it through the eyes of truth. We just discovered for competition, the way we move through that is to remember our purpose. And the antidote for defensiveness is non-resistance. That's a hard one. We have a lot in us that wants to resist when something doesn't look and feel right. And defensiveness in itself is rooted in resistance, which gets triggered by a perceived threat. And it's not just that rigidness that happens in our body, but our mind, when we move into defensive mode, also tends to get pretty rigid. We are closing our ears. We're not usually listening to what's happening around us. We have already made up our mind, in many respects, what the outcome needs to look like, and we are going to defend and to try and bring that into being no matter what. It's kind of like an electrical circuit, this idea of resistance. You know, you've got your components, you've got the power source, you've got the wiring, you've got the outlet, you've got the bulb, perhaps, that it lights up when it's plugged in. And resistance, we understand through Ohm's law, says that whenever there is that resistance on the line, the power source is diminished. The ability to get that power source to its end product diminishes the more and more resistance there is. In a similar way, our ability to be present to life requires us to be conscious of how well we are being that conduit for our power source. Our power source is God. And as that God source comes into us, the less resistant we are, the greater the source, the greater the power that we have to be a light into our world. If we continue to have resistance in our line, we know from electricity that eventually it will totally degrade that line. And resistance can do the same thing for us and our spiritual line to that God power. When we're in that non-resistant mode, we allow the infinite realm of possibilities to be present. We've now become flexible into how this might unfold and evolve. When we're being the way of God, then we have let go of resistance, and we are in that flow. We are in the God flow, and all things can move through us, and we can be that true flow of presence. Whenever the winds of conflict rise up into our experience, it is a signal. Should be the thing that triggers for us if we're really wanting to do this work, to shift our awareness. And we shift our awareness back to center when we remember that we are here to be in communion with God, that we are here to see through the eyes of God, when we are here to be the way and the truth and the life of God, and allow it to flow through us without any human resistance to it all. So I want to take us into a time of meditation and just ask that you would set aside whatever you might be holding on to, even set aside all of the thoughts that you've been having as we've gone through this morning and these ideas, ruminating, and simply allow yourself to take these next few moments to be in that space of being an open flow for God's presence, moving through you and expressing as you. One of the things that we can do as we bring ourselves into this inward awareness is to allow ourselves to fortify our strength, to fortify our center. And we can do that, and this is something that they teach in the martial arts, by breathing into our gut, by breathing into the center of our being. It's located about 3 fingers below your navel. And as you sit up straight and make sure your feet are firmly planted on the ground, see if you can imagine this single spot within you, your own internal center. And bring all of your attention to this place. Breathing in and through this centered place. And with every breath that you let go, seeing that breath move that wave and that ripple of peace that emanates in your center out into your body. That peace that can heal. That peace that can inspire and enliven. Continuing to focus on breathing in and through this center and allowing that breath to move beyond your physical being, out into the room, out into the building and into the community, broadening the center that you have to live and to express from. The purpose of being in this centered space is not to make the storm go away. The purpose is to get that sense of calm and connectedness in order to become fully present to the storm, in order to be the way and the life and the truth of God that can calm the storms. Know that you can return to this center simply by taking a moment, placing your attention on it, and breathing into it. And as you do, you call forth, you embody the strength, the light, the love, the wisdom, the wholeness that is God alive in you. And as we gently bring this time of inward connection to a close, once again be aware of the wholeness of your body and the room and the sounds. And breathe in and bring with you into your full awareness the energy, the aliveness that comes from being the peace. And whenever you're ready, you can open your eyes. You know, as I said at the beginning, I believe that we are at an important juncture in our human evolution, and that we're each here to play our part in making that next leap in consciousness. You who are here, who are awake to the message, those who are seeking, whether they know it or not, this own awakening in their own lives, have each come to play a vital role in bringing forth this way of being in which we truly begin to value, to respect, to love, to listen, and know that we can accomplish so much more with collaboration and cooperation that we've ever been able to do with competition. And to move beyond this idea of winners and losers, of either or, and begin to say both and. I know that's my thing. My daughter goes, "You're always saying that." It's like, it's true. It's all both and. Everything is both and. And one way to do that is to begin to ask ourselves, am I being the way of God, or am I being in the way of God? The change is here. We are the change makers. And it's happening. It's happening with every moment and with every breath that we consciously awaken to it. Namaste. You know, we do. We live in an abundant universe, and we live in a world where how we choose to share of our financial good makes a difference in our world. And we hope, and we pray, and we know that this community will continue to receive all that is needed in order to continue to inspire spiritual growth, to continue to transform lives, and to make a positive difference in our world. As we prepare to share of these this morning, feel that energy of being a part of this change, that you are bringing God's love and God's light into the world. Who are watching us live and who watch this later, we invite you to certainly be in that flow of giving and receiving. You can go to our webpage, centerofunity.org. You can also do it on the app. There's many, many ways that we'll receive your gift from you. And you can also slide down on that gift page, and there are pictures, and you can select one of they're the same affirmations we're offering here. You can select the one that really resonates with you and have that bless you this week. So let us take these gifts, these tithes, into our hands and into our hearts and bless them together. Divine love, as me, blesses and multiplies all that I give, all that I receive, and all that I am.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace that was meant to be. With God as our Father, family all are we. Let me walk with my family in perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my joyous vow. To take each moment and live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me.
And so as we go into this day, into this week, being and living from the center of our being, even as the storms swirl around, we go, knowing our prayer for protection. Together, the light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. And the presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Have a beautiful week.